Hello friends, we begin with the first block of MEG 6 and that is the Puritan context. So let's begin. As you all know that in 1495 Christopher Columbus discovered America. After that in 1584 Sir Walter Raleigh of England dispatched a ship to America. In 1606 establishment of first English settlement in Jamestown, Virginia. So when people start moving towards the shores of America that faces the Europe, they began establishing colonies there. So the first such establishment was named as Jamestown, Virginia after the Virgin Queen. So when Puritans migrated to, or you can say the first when the first batch of English people migrated to the to America and landed on the American soil, they were not familiar with the wilderness and the environment of the then America. So they could not cope up with the harsh and wild environment. As a result, they suffered from various diseases. They suffered from homesickness as well. They missed England, and this was the cause of decline of the decline of the early settlement. But then the Virginia Company, which sponsored this migration, allowed the colonies to take farmlands to keep them busy, to keep them engaged. They allowed the colonies, they allowed the people of the colonies to take sizable tracts of farmlands. So that they get involved with these farmlands and people started doing farming on these farmlands. And what they first which first crop they or you can say that uh, what these Puritans first grew on the American soils was tobacco, and later on they began cotton farming as well. So once they started farming tobacco, the economy thrived, and Virginia became a prosperous settlement. Now, while all this was going on in Virginia, another set of Puritan settlers, which are basically known as Pilgrims, stationed itself at the Plymouth harbor of Massachusetts Bay in 1620. Okay, so the first settlement was in Jamestown, Virginia, and the second settlement basically happened when pilgrims, those who broke away from the Roman Catholic Church and believed that reforms should continue, they migrated to the New World and stationed themselves at Massachusetts Bay. Almost a decade later, great Puritan migration happened from England, and settlement sprang up at Dorchester, Boston, Watertown, Roxbury, Mystic, and Lynn. So you see how the English settlement started spreading across the uh, borders of America. In 1640, among the colonies, religious sectarianism takes place, and this resulted in the formation of Rhode Island. Rhode Island, people who believed in free will and who were a little liberal than strict Puritan uh, uh, beliefs and ideologies, they under the able under the able leadership of Roger Williams, they migrated to Rhode Island. End of the 17th century, the entire region was named New England, a flourishing new enclave within the English Empire. Now, here I would like to point out the difference between the New Englanders and the Virginia settlers. New Englanders were basically pilgrims. They believed that they are God sent angels and God has sent them to establish a utopia in the wilderness. They believed that old England has been taken over by Satan and now they are on a mission into the wilderness. While Virginia settlers were materialistic, they were basically materialistic in their nature. They wanted to own property, they did tobacco farming, cotton farming, and they were desperately in need of indentured and chattel slaves. So basically they were kind of this was kind of a rise of a merchant class in Virginia. But in New England, they were basically the followers of strict Puritanism, because they believe that they are God sent angel, and it's their mission, it's their responsibility to form a new world that imitates the Jerusalem. Now, who were the New England Puritans? Now we see in Virginia, they were generally merchant class people, and they believe in ownership of the land and ownership of the slaves. They were basically materialistic in their nature. But New England Puritans were mostly pilgrims. These were those who broke away from the Roman Catholic Church of England. People who broke away from the Roman Catholic Church of England were Protestants, but later on another branch sprouted from these Protestants, and those were called Puritans, because Puritans believed that reforms and purification should continue until an ideal state is achieved. And because of this mission, they left Old England and migrated to the new land, to the American land, and landed on American soil. They didn't care about the inhabitants of America, the natives, the Red Indians. Rather, they thought that it's their mission to clean the land of any savages and establish a Jerusalem renewed. So I hope it's clear to you that who were the New England Puritans. Now, the emergence of Puritanism as the hegemonic American ideology. The mission was to clear, as we studied in the earlier slide, that the main mission of the Pilgrims, though of the Puritans who migrated to the New England, were to clear the land of savages, the uncivilized inhabitants. For that, they became barbaric. English were involved in mass massacre of the Native Americans. They exploited the natives in every possible way, and they not only this, they glorified this exploitation. They glorified their abuses in their writings and journals. So at that time, the literature were mainly consisted of the glorification of the atrocities that were committed against the native inhabitants of the land. Puritans wrote that God had sent them to clean the land, to clean the wild land, to civilize the people. They think that they are the only civilized people on earth, and it's their mission to civilize other people. Not only this, with them they brought deadly diseases like bacilli and smallpox. These diseases were very common in England at that time, and America, that was quite safe that was quite immune, or you can say that the environment was quite harsh to spread diseases like bacilli and smallpox. Once Puritans arrived on the land, they carried these bacteria and viruses along with them, and because Native Americans or the Red Indians were not very used to of tackling these diseases, their immune system was not very familiar with tackling these kind of bacteria and viruses, so they succumbed to these diseases, and this cleared the ground for Puritans and made things easier for the Puritans, because many of the native Indians succumbed to these diseases and died. The glorification of barbaric killings and wars in writings became prominent. So the literature mainly consisted of the glorification of barbaric killing and wars. Puritans believed that they alone were the founders of American civilization, because they know how to they knew how to read and write. They believed that they are the only people who can make who can or who are the founders of American civilization, not standing with the inhabitants of the territory before or after. Even though the inhabitants of the Red Indians have their own culture, own beliefs, own traditional things, the Puritans believed that they are the only civilized people and they are the founders of American civilization. In this way, the natives American were suppressed and basically pushed towards the west or suppressed by the Puritans. Over the centuries, this emerged as a dominant view of American history. So later on, people started believing that only Puritans were the founders of American civilization. Now, this is the second unit, I believe. We have completed the first unit. I would recommend that you go through your course material and just give it a thorough read through. Just give it a read through, and I hope I have addressed all of the important topics, and you will be able to frame your answers very easily and effectively. If in any case you are not able to frame your answers, just go through the 10-year paper and try to frame your answers based on what we have discussed in here, and based on what you will read in your IGNOU course material. In case you are not able to make your own answers, just drop me a note or drop me a comment here, or you can join my telegram channel and drop your comments there, and I will help you with the answers and notes. So, the consolidation and dispersal of the Puritan utopia. First, it was a communal utopia that they believe that Puritans believed that they are going to create a world that is very ideal, and that they are going to create a Jerusalem renewed, ideal society. They were on the mission of creating an ideal society. And the second feature of Puritan society was unanimity, that although people discuss things and laws before it is tabled, they believed in unanimity. Once the law is tabled, once the law is given or is established, everyone has to follow it unanimously. There should be no revolt, there should be no dissent. So these were the two very important features of Puritan community. What disturbed the unity among the Puritans? Okay, so now Puritans were very unanimous in nature. Whatever law were put to practice, everyone followed it. But later on, what happened? The emergence of merchant class and the emergence of trading interest resulted in the dissent among the Puritans itself. So, what caused this dissent? What is the main cause of this dissent? There are three main causes. Actually, what happened? Massachusetts Bay Colony became devoid of funds because financial support from England ceased. Trade of fur declined, and there was economic crisis in New England. So they needed money. So for that, they resorted to fishing along the coasts of northern New England and Newfoundland. So the fishing business thrived, and they became rich. But now they needed slaves. This gave rise to the uh, dominant merchant class in New England. And then there is a conflict between the Puritan authorities and the merchants of Boston, resulting in the formation of a merchant lobby. Okay, so a merchant lobby is formed. Merchants, these merchants complained to the royal authorities in London about the strict regime and the price control by the Puritan authorities, because Puritan authorities says that goods are for everyone. The price should be controlled. But these business class people believe that they could raise the prices, and demand and supply things were there. So, because of this, there was a rift between merchants and the Puritans. So, when merchants went to complain against these Puritans in London in 1684, English crown came in support of the merchants and declared Massachusetts a royal colony. What does this mean? This means that now the top leader of the Puritan community is elected in London from among the politicians of the England, not from the Puritans who are living in New England, but in old England, the governor or whoever is at the top position is chosen from among the politicians of the England, and these politicians were always in favor of the merchant class. So merchant class thrived, and strict Puritans or Pilgrims couldn't do anything about it. Moving on to the next slide. The beginning of dissent within the fold of Puritanism. Not only this, not only because of the trading interest, there were other things that were responsible for the dissent among the Puritanism. First, the founder of Rhode Island, Roger Williams, he said he was very liberal, and he said that church should not be supported by the taxes paid by the public. There is no need for anyone to attend the church. They can do only if they want to do. If people want to gather together and form churches, these should be totally self-supporting and not connected to the state. These gathered worshippers should be Baptist, and Baptist Protestantism has its root in America's Rhode Island. Rhode Island attracted liberal and discontented Puritans from all over New England. So you see, the roots of dissent were among the Puritans itself. The another very dominant figure uh, uh, in the Puritan, very dominant figure that brought about revolution was Anne Hutchinson. She was the first woman who raised her voice against Puritan patriarchy, but she suffered a lot. She was captured by Indians, and not only this, she was banished from the Puritan society and later she was killed. It was believed that some Indians killed her. Now, this was all about dissent within the fold of Puritanism. Now we come to the literary aspect of a Puritan society. Puritans and literary artists. What kind of literature thrived during the Puritanism era? So we all know that wherever there are people, there is culture, and if there is culture, there is literature. Literature is a very prominent aspect of culture. So what are the features of Puritan literature? Number one is utilitarian, that is, it is practical rather than attractive. It basically deals with the story of age. It basically deals with the narration of the lives of famous people. It basically deals with discourse upon human duties. There were hymns and praises to God. There is no general literary theory for Puritan literature. The literary style was simple, lucid, and controlled, plain, and it is not to excite passion but to educate. Literature was, according to Puritans, literature was not to excite passion but to educate and instruct the pupil. Talk about the gospel of God. Talks about the gospel of God. Now, literary genres of the Puritans. What all literary genres were thrived during the Puritan era? William Bradford and Cotton Mather. These were first and third generation Puritanism respectively. They wrote journals and chronicles. And in these journals and chronicles, they glorified the wars and barbaric acts committed by the Englishmen on the native Indians. Then the main genres that Puritans practiced. Number one is diary writing, the diary of the eminent minister Michael Wigglesworth. And then there is autobiography, the autobiography of Increase Mather. Increase Mather published over 100 works, his stories, some sermons, tracts, treatises, and a biography of his father. Then Puritan poetry. So up until diary writing and autobiography, things were okay. But what about Puritan poetry? Poetry was a strict no-no in Puritan society because we all know that poetry is basically the use of figurative language and symbolic language, figurative and symbolic language. And poetry also excites the senses. Poetry is passionate. Poetry is romantic. And Puritans were all against these things. They were against all of these things. So, but do you think that poetry could survive during the Puritan era? Yes, it survived because later on in the 20th century, many scholars and researchers have discovered innumerable Puritan poems. Many of these poems contain highly provocative language and allusions. These allusions are not only to Bible but also to famous and classic Greek writers and authors Ovid, Horace, and Virgil. Intertextual references to contemporary poets like Shakespeare, Spenser's were also very common in Puritan poems. One such example is Richard Baxter's The Saints' Everlasting Rest. So we see, even though the Puritan society, the Puritans were very strict people, they believed in the gospel of God, they believed in sin and damnation, they believed that man is a born sinner, and they practiced a very simple and plain lifestyle. Poetry thrived. And why did it thrive? Because poets and authors and thinkers and philosophers of that era, they believed in the necessity of expressing their thoughts, the necessity of expressing themselves. Jeremiads. Jeremiads. Poets were in great dilemma. They had to adhere to the strict Puritan guidelines. So that is very obvious. It's very obvious that poets suffered a great deal of dilemma. They had to adhere to the strict Puritan guidelines, yet couldn't stop the flow of creative juices that forced them to write ornamented poetry. This dilemma was addressed by Puritan ministers in their sermons. These sermons were called Puritan Jeremiads. Example is Samuel Danforth's A Brief Record of New England's Errand into the wilderness. Later on, the Jeremiads became whole more encouraging and cheerful and thus not quite typically Puritan. So we see that earlier Jeremiads were quite typically Puritan. They dictated, they preached. But later on, these Jeremiads also become encouraging, cheerful, and inculcated a feeling of happiness among the people. So we see how the shift is happening from the strict, plain, simple living to a kind of a liberal, materialistic, and passionate living. Now, this was all about Puritan context. Now, in Puritan society, there were other contexts as well that went into the making of American literature. Some contexts of American literature other than the Puritan context were the Quaker context. In the Quaker context, two names are very important, George Fox and William Penn. Then the Indian context, the natives or the Red Indians, or you can say the aboriginals, the natives of the land. The black context, basically the context of the slaves, and the poor white context. Those were those who worked as an indentured slaves in the houses of rich white people. So these contexts I am not going in detail here. They are you can read your study material if you want to. If you want me to go into the details of these contexts, you just drop me a comment below and I will look into it. So these all contexts go into the making of American literature. Although these contexts were suppressed in some or the other way, all of these contributed toward the making of Puritan literature or American literature. Now, American Enlightenment, from the colonial to the federal. How America changed from colonial society to a federal society. Obviously because of American Enlightenment. And this came into being by some of the English thinkers like Newton and John Locke's thoughts were scientific, rational, and this worldly. This was a blow to Puritan philosophy of divine power, sin, and damnation, and acted as a propelling force for bringing in the much needed American Enlightenment among the colonies. So the two important figures that were responsible for bringing the Enlightenment among the American colonies were Newton and John Locke. Then the third name is Benjamin Franklin. He also stressed on rationality, practical conduct, and materialism. Then Saint John de Crevecoeur, he was Franklin's friend and he was a true Franklinian. His book Letters from an American Farmer focuses on individualism and industriousness rather than the belief in divine and some kind of a in God, in sin and damnation, in thinking that man is a born sinner. These all people believed in individualism and industriousness. Now, what about slavery and the Enlightenment? Does the Enlightenment has had any effect on slavery? Slave trade thrived in America, and even Newton's laws and Locke's philosophy couldn't do much about it. Slaves, those who are black people, were treated badly and brutally and were subjected to ruthless and barbaric treatment. Women and the Enlightenment. There was male supremacy among the people of the Puritan society. But this male supremacy was often seen among the merchant class people. Wives were considered inferior to the husband whom they were to obey reverently. However, the Puritans and Quakers treated women as persons of substance and significance. So this was all about block 1. I hope I have covered all the important topics. If you have any question or query, you can drop a comment and I will try to address it. Meanwhile, you can also join my Telegram channel. I have given the link in the description and post your queries there as well. if you want me to make a video on any topic that you are facing difficulty dealing with, please drop your comment here or in my Telegram channel once you join the group there, and I will be more than happy to solve your queries. That's it for today. See you soon. Bye.